This week has been extremely busy and extremely exhausting. Barack Obama gets standing ovations at the All-Star game. Donald Trump keeps getting booed. That contrast is loud and very embarrassing for one of them. Trump's poll numbers are cratering. Immigration crackdown is a big factor here. He still wants his name on everything. Ego fully on display. His ego is huge. His self-esteem must be the size of a peanut. The internet is obsessed over Punch the Monkey. There's also real concern about MAGA trying to tilt the 2026 election, really steal that election. New Epstein files dropped. Media pressure is building. Big personalities are reassessing their futures, and they're leaving. They're just saying, no, it has been nonstop. Let's dig into it. It's pretty scary to think that during an election that you can have folks standing, members of ICE or whatever, or law enforcement, any kind of poll watchers and the threatening or whatever, intimidating, to have them intimidated and just standing there at polling places, I think is just beyond the pale. We're talking about Pam Bondi. I think that she is probably somewhere on a short list, but as I said, maybe a little bit more job security than Kristi Noem. That display that happened last week that Donald Trump came out and said she did a great job for, this Donald Trump usually can read his folks. I don't think he's doing a good job of reading what's happening out in the world, in the zeitgeist, because everyone is making fun of that moment, and saying, oh, at least the Dow is up to 50,000. This was her in that moment, and I'm going to talk to you about it.
The Dow is over $50,000. I don't know why you're laughing. You're a great stock trader, as I hear, Raskin. The Dow is over 50,000 right now.
Pause.
S&P
she knew. Did you hear that? In that moment, she knew how ridiculous she sounded.
Yep.
Okay, so Mark, let me ask you this, because you are really adamant about this. You are adamant about that someone, Andy, can you get me Nancy Mace? We had it, I think, earlier today. Let me know if you have it. But you're really adamant about this death because you think there's something fishy. Someone asked in the chat, did you get a chance? And I don't know if I've ever asked you that. I don't know if we've ever talked about it. Did you get a chance to identify your brother's body?
I was the one who did identify his body. I'm the next.
You did. Okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure. Okay. So you identified his body. And so, but
Yes.
You're really adamant about him not killing himself. You think that this was a homicide and there are people involved.
Let me make something clear, Don. When I first heard that he was dead from an apparent suicide, I heard it that morning on CNN. The government didn't notify me as they claim. I heard it on CNN. I was having breakfast in a hotel in Virginia. And the next day I had to come back to New York to identify his body. And then they did the autopsy. Meanwhile, overnight, we got Dr. Michael Barden to be there because as the next of kin, I had the right to have my own pathologist witness it. And I fully believed he committed suicide when I heard it. At that moment, I had no reason to doubt it. Why should I doubt it? I heard it on the news, and I know he was facing a potentially long time in jail. But other things that are not really that public is when Jeffrey was first arrested, his attorneys called me and asked me if I would participate in his bail. So I said, sure, of course. I said, put up my house in Florida, so that to help it, because if more people participate in your bail, you're more likely to get bail. And obviously, he didn't get bail, so he was in jail. Then they called me a few weeks later and they asked me if not only would I put up my house, but would I guarantee Jeffrey's entire bail? They were going to appeal the bail decision. Like we hear that, P. Diddy's tried to appeal his bail decision a few times. So I said, okay, I'll guarantee Jeffrey's entire bail, in essence, doubling it. And he also had another friend putting up some assets for bail. So this would have been the highest bail in U.S. history with all these assets put up. And he had a hearing would have come up in another week or two tops to have the appeal. Okay. And I could see if they had that hearing and the bail was denied again. Okay, if you want to commit suicide, go ahead, because you don't want to spend a year in jail awaiting trial. But it makes no sense to anybody why he would kill himself prior to that bail hearing. Because if he got bail, he'd be living in his house. He'd have an ankle monitor on. He'd have armed guards and cameras to make sure, he didn't go anywhere. And it doesn't make any sense for him to kill himself prior to that hearing for bail.
my colleague Barak Ravid was putting together all the various pieces of what we know. There's been so much incremental reporting done over the last weeks and months about, are we moving toward a deal? Are we moving toward war? And he just sort of made some calls and stepped back and said, here's everything we know that indicates we're pointing toward war. And here's everything we know that indicates we're moving towards a deal. And there's a whole lot more on the war side of the ledger. And folks he was talking to said, the scenarios that are being presented to Trump that are under consideration, these are not the kinds of things we were talking about in January. When these protests were happening in January, Trump was looking at potentially striking a security forces headquarters in Tehran or something like that, a symbolic strike to say the United States doesn't approve of this. That, at least according to our sources, is not what's being discussed now. It's a much more significant military operation that would unfold probably over the course of weeks. You listed the military assets that are in the region. They certainly have the capacity there and the firepower there to do quite significant long-term operations. I agree with Miles when he said Trump does not want a land war in the Middle East. I don't think we're going to have Marines landing in Tehran in any sort of numbers. But I do think we're talking, assuming this goes ahead, and it looks like that's where we're headed. We're talking about days and weeks of missile strikes, air strikes, potentially operations that Israeli officials and some in the White House hope will pose a real challenge to the stability of the Iranian regime. So we basically looked at all that and said we didn't think that there was the kind of robust public and congressional debate that you might expect ahead of something of this magnitude, that it had been kind of a sideshow. And obviously the reaction to our piece suggests that people agreed with that.
So I told you that Barack Obama had not said anything about the whole ape thing. I told you they were just, he's like, brush it off or whatever. He would have his moment. And he had his moment. The first one that I've seen is with Brian Tyler Cohen, who is a friend of this show. And here's what Barack Obama said to Brian.
President, thanks so much for joining me.
It is wonderful to be here, Brian. Thank you for having me.
So as you know better than anybody, the discourse has devolved into a level of cruelty that we haven't seen before. What was disqualifying just a few years ago now not only feels fine, acceptable, but actually rewarded. You have administration officials saying that the victims of ISIS aggression are domestic terrorists. You have J.D. Vance coming out and saying that it's okay. You don't have to apologize for being white.
I love Brian. Can we just get to his answer, please? Let me just scroll into his answer. Okay, thank you.
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that the majority of the American people find this behavior deeply troubling. It is true that it gets attention. It's true that it's a distraction. But, as I'm traveling around the country, as you're traveling around the country, you meet people. They still believe in decency, courtesy, kindness. And there's this sort of clown show that's happening in social media and on television. And what is true is that there doesn't seem to be any shame about this among people who used to feel like you had to have some sort of decorum and a sense of propriety and respect for the office, right? So that's been lost. But the reason I point out that I don't think the majority of the American people approve of this is because ultimately the answer is going to come from the American people. And we just saw this in Minnesota, in Minneapolis.
Yeah, and who was it? What can I think of her name? Oh my gosh, who had the issue, Oliver, with the story about CCOT?
Sharon Alfonsi.
Sharon Alfonsi. Sorry, Sharon.
Hard to imagine that she'll be there in the long run either, because Bari Weiss has, made her disdain for Sherry pretty public at this point. The other thing, Don, too, we talked about Sharon Alfonsi having her story held at the last minute. My understanding, we reported this in Status back in January, last month, is that there's an Anderson Cooper piece that's been in the works for several months about, I remember that. Yeah, about the fact that migrants from South Africa are permitted to come to the United States, largely based on this conspiracy theory that Donald Trump has been peddling about, white genocide in South Africa. This story has been held for quite some time. Anderson's been working on it since last year. It's been several months in the making. And we reported last month that Barry Weiss had sent the story back with extensive notes. And that had at least, I don't know about Anderson, but it had definitely frustrated the producer who has worked at 60 Minutes for about 30 years, a veteran 60 Minutes producer. He was very frustrated by the fact that they were getting these extensive notes from Barry Weiss. And that leads me to another point, Don. Barry Weiss is running 60 Minutes in a way that's unlike her predecessors. Typically, and I talked to a number of people when we reported the story, typically the news chiefs at CBS News do not meddle in 60 Minutes. That the final buck usually stops with the executive producer of 60 Minutes, who is now Tanya Simon. The news chief of the network does not come in and oversee and kind of babysit and helicopter edit the stories. That's not what's happening right now. Barry Weiss effectively is the executive producer of 60 Minutes. So Tanya Simon is almost been, to some extent, handicapped because she can approve things, but then Barry Weiss can come in and say, no, we're going to hold that story, or no, that Anderson Cooper story needs this and that. And that has frustrated the staff, not only because of Barry Weiss's ideological perspectives and the way she's moving the network to the right, but because she's, from my understanding, just a terrible manager and doesn't understand the process of how to get a story to air, how 60 Minutes runs, how the edit works, when the screenings are, which she admitted in the town hall she did earlier this month or last month with staff. She doesn't understand how this network operates. And so when she tries to micromanage things, it leads to mass frustration. And so 60 Minutes staffers are not only frustrated about the ideological direction under Barry Weiss, but they're just frustrated that she just doesn't know how to manage effectively.
Well, look, it's not, we've seen this story before, Oliver. We've lived a version of this story. And this moving the network to the right shit never, ever, ever works. Didn't they learn from what happened at CNN and Chris Licht and Zasloff and those guys that or John Malone? Like that, it just doesn't work. You lose your core audience and you lose the trust in the network. And then if you have people leaving, if you have your big people like Anderson leaving, that also erodes trust and viewership as well. Do they not understand that? Apparently they don't.
I want to talk to you about one of the moments in the hearing, and that is the Attorney General would not look at the Epstein survivors behind her. Did that surprise you?
I think that was kind of cold on her part. I think she was afraid to. And look, these survivors would love to have a meeting. It's not about Bill Clinton and it's not about Donald Trump. This Epstein Files Transparency Act was about getting these survivors justice. We've got some degree of transparency, but it's called the Department of Justice, not the Department of Transparency. And so what these survivors need, they need to see some of their own 302 forms, which haven't been released. And they also need to see some of the men that they've implicated prosecuted.
Do you still have confidence in Pam Bondi as Attorney General?
I don't think Pam Bondi has confidence in Pam Bondi. She wasn't confident enough to engage in anything but name calling in a hearing. And so, no, I don't have confidence in her. She hasn't got any sort of accountability there at the DOJ. When I asked her specifically who redacted Leslie Wexner's name from the one document that mattered, she couldn't give me an answer. She wouldn't give me an answer. But ultimately, it's her who is responsible for the document production, according to our law. The Attorney General, it's not Todd Blanche. It's not the people below them. You can assign tasks to people, but you can't assign your responsibility.
You can assign tasks, but you can't assign your responsibility. And I thought the best thing he said was, I don't believe Pam Bondi has confidence in Pam Bondi. It's a DOJ that's out of control. And here's the weird thing. Now you tell me, I'm going to show this to you guys. You tell me if you care about any of the names that they have mentioned, because you know Pam Bondi came out this weekend and said, or recently saying that they had released all the files and that this was over. And then Todd Blanche put out this document saying that they didn't want to release some of the files. This is why they didn't want to release some of the files. It's because there were people who were listed there that might be exposed and they didn't want to expose them. So can we show this list? Because now all of these people that they're saying Maxwell, while other individuals are mentioned only in a portion of a document that includes press reporting, that on its face is unrelated to the Epstein and Maxwell matters. Now, here's the thing. Now, look at the people here. Do you think that this administration cares about some of the names on this list about being exposed? Do you think that they care about some of the people on the list? Nobody on this list cares if you mention their names, especially if it was part of a press report. Pramila Jayapal, she doesn't care. Mick Jagger is probably mentioned in the thing. Do you think these people care? Jay-Z? And do you think this administration is trying to protect Jay-Z or Pramila Jayapal or J.B. Pritzker or Susan Rice? You think they're trying to protect any of these people? This is flat out bullshit. They're not trying to protect any of these people. This is Jamie Raskin. It's a bit long. I don't know if I'm going to play all of it, but it's on how Democrats can protect the midterms. Here it is.
The first is from our old friend Diane Rehm. She says, what can you do to prevent Republicans and ICE from interfering with people voting in the midterm elections?
So thank you, Diane, and thank you for everything you've done. I mean, we're in that fight right now, like in North Carolina, right now in Texas. So I don't want people to think about a stolen election as something that's going to happen in November. They're trying to stack the rules and change the rules right now all over the country, and people are fighting all over the country. We, of course, have our great lawyer, Mark Elias, with a team of, I don't know, it's 80 or 90 lawyers now, but there's ACLU, there's NAACP Legal Defense Fund. These things are being fought out. But remember, the best way to steal an election is to run an election, and that's what the Republicans are trying to do. Like in Texas, they try to take over all of the outposts of management of the election to prevent people from voting and stop people from voting. But when people say to me, he's going to cancel the election, Trump's got no power to cancel the election. We had midterm congressional elections in the middle of the Civil War. We had midterm elections in the middle of World War II. I mean, we've gone through major wars and cataclysms and had midterm elections. Why would we cancel it for Donald Trump? Because it's going to hurt his feelings to see his party go down into humiliating defeat. I'm sorry, that's not a reason to cancel American democracy.
Well, I think the fear is that he's going to somehow enlist the military into stopping it.
And we've had a lot of our colleagues in Congress speak out very strongly to people in the military about how not only can they, but how they must refuse unlawful orders. Now they're retaliating against Alyssa Slotkin and Jason Crow and our colleagues, and so we've got to defend them. I mean,
okay,
look,
so you get it. You get it. What do you think of what he's saying?
I mean, he's absolutely right. The idea that we would cancel an election because Donald Trump knows what's coming and the Republicans know what's coming is obviously fanciful, unconstitutional, undemocratic, but there is a design for that. And this is why Steve Bannon's out there saying we're going to send ICE out to the election polls. They're trying to scare us. I think one of the elements here that's really important for Democrats to understand, though, is part of how we overcome this and preserve our democracy and ensure the midterms happen the way they should is if we as a party inspire the American people enough to want to give a damn. I've heard so much over the last few years, people just give up on Democrats and to feel like, you know what, like they're operating under the same playbook as if Donald Trump never existed, and they keep losing when they should win. They keep, they're like Charlie Brown and the football. They keep going after it and missing it and falling on their face. Democrats got to show the American people that they're willing to change tack. They're willing to adapt to the times, that they're ready to meet the moment.
That taxpayer dollars should be used to make life more affordable for the American people, not brutalize or kill them. That's the whole reason we're in this fight right now. That's the whole reason the DHS is getting ready to shut down. That's the whole reason why
you agree with me and Joy. Abolish ICE.
That is listen, I'm going to use the language that I want to use. You can use the language that you want to use. And the language that I'm using right now relates to these type of bold, meaningful, dramatic changes that are designed to save lives right now in communities that look like the ones that I represent.
Okay.
And that's the goal.
Okay. All right. So listen, I understand what he's saying. and I'm not both sides in here. He's saying, don't put words in my mouth. Essentially, what I'm doing is saying to defund ICE at this point, when people were talking about defund the police. But there are, even though the public sentiment about ICE is not good, there are still people who believe, rightly or wrongly, but that there is a role for ICE in this country, but not in the current iteration that is now, because there are some good men and women who do work for the Homeland Security Department. They're not those people out there on the streets, Wajahad, who only have 47 days of training.
You know what's interesting? I don't put too much stock in polls, but those polls were fascinating to me. But what's also interesting, it's the money around it. So Melania Trump's movie, it's bombed. It had a 70% decrease in sales. There was a big MAGA Trump store in Pennsylvania, where I'm from, a major swing state that shut down. Like even parts of the cult financially, and he cares about the coin, parts of the cult is falling apart. So I think that is another indicator, another sign to have hope and not think everything is falling apart and we're going to lose it all, that Miss Melania, stores are shutting down, and Eveline don't want no bad news. I'm surprised you haven't sang it, Don. Don't bring me no bad news.
Don't nobody bring me no bad news.
Brennan Carr is leading the FCC in a way that is unprecedented to his predecessors. I've talked to a number of former FCC officials, commissioners, chairs of the FCC, bipartisan, whether they're Republican or Democrats. They have said that what Brennan Carr is doing is contrary to First Amendment principles the FCC is supposed to uphold. And it's caused a lot of alarm amongst his predecessors. It's caused a lot of alarm amongst people at the FCC. Ana Gomez, the Democratic commissioner, has done a whole First Amendment campaign across the country, raising concerns about how Brennan Carr is running the FCC. I also think it's not just the FCC here. The FCC obviously is trying to change these equal time rules, but they haven't done it yet. And Colbert's making the point that his network, CBS, just totally capitulated in advance and said, you can't run this interview because of this threat to change the equal time rules. I think you could point to it as another example of this network under David Ellison's control now, doing everything it can to curry favor with the Trump administration as they try to swallow Warner Brother Discovery and get that deal across the finish line.
Dave's and others, as well as Drop Site News, they're saying this is not a dress rehearsal. My question was, is it a wag the dog? It could be somewhere in between, but we are on the brink of war. I don't think that's hyperbole to say that.
Brink could mean weeks or days, but it seems like, and this is just trying to, guess from what we're seeing move around in the world. I mean, the amount of military equipment that we're moving there doesn't seem like a bluff. And it also doesn't seem like it's something where the president cares one way or another how any of these negotiations turn out. Because when you move that much stuff into the theater, as I think it was Bob Dylan who said, when you got a lot of knives and forks, you got to cut something. Now, if there's some diplomatic purpose, if he's trying to convince the Iranians that this time he's really serious, that's a lot of movement and energy and cost to put forces in place. So I don't think it's that. The question now is, what is it? What is the purpose of this? That whether these talks succeed or fail, that the president wants to attack Iran. And what does that mean? What would we be attacking? What would we be trying to achieve? And I don't think, we haven't had any public debate about this. There's been no discussion of it. Congress, Republicans in Congress are, again, AWOL. And the peace president is about to launch a war with, a country of 90 million people. So I'm not clear on what he thinks he's going to achieve, but it looks like no matter what we do, no matter what happens in these negotiations, the president seems kind of bent on some kind of military action.
You're saying you don't know what the goal? You said we don't know what we're going to achieve. Then what's the goal here then?
I don't know. I mean, I think on the one hand, he could there is that rhetoric that comes out of the White House that says we're going to end the Iranian nuclear program one way or another. Of course, supposedly we did that months ago, but that would be a sustained, to do something like that, you'd have to have a sustained bombing campaign in multiple places across Iran. But I don't think he's, I mean, again, this is not a White House that seems to think these things through. And so could be, he may think somewhere that this is going to be a war of regime change, and that he will go down in history as the liberator of Iran, that this is, his Operation Iranian Freedom. But when you're moving that much military equipment into a theater and you're not talking to Congress or the American people about why you're about to do that with with a country in the Middle East where you vowed never to get into any more wars, that leaves the rest of us merely to speculate. That's all I can do is just kind of guess at what he's doing, but I'm not sure even he knows.
Look, Dave, you were here when Miles Taylor said he's been in in the Situation Room when Donald Trump doesn't know what he's doing, and he's essentially saying something very similar to what Tom Nichols is saying. He doesn't think that Donald Trump has thought this out, and if there is any real plan or a roadmap here.
Yeah, so I mean, Trump has contradicted himself when he's talked about what the goals of these negotiations are. At times, he's said a nuclear deal is his objective, something that eliminates the threat of Iran getting a nuclear bomb is great and would fit the bill. At other times, he's said it would have to be a bigger deal that addresses Iran's missiles, its regional activity. So you could probably apply that to what he would hope to achieve from a military operation as well. I mean, he could, as we were just discussing, he could focus on the nuclear threat as he did last time around. But there certainly seem to be people around him who think that the regime has never been weaker, and this is the time to try to really topple the reverse the 1979 revolution once and for all. That is a massive undertaking that would have massive implications for the region, for the United States, et cetera. And so whether the folks around Trump and Trump himself have thought through all of that, you'd have to ask them.
You're like, my name is Wes. I ain't in this mess. I have no idea what they're thinking. But I think that's true of everyone. I think even the people around him have no idea. The people around him have no idea what he's thinking. If you look at, we played J.D. Vance's response just moments ago, and J.D. Vance basically saying it looks like something that's in progress and there have been negotiations or whatever, but really, saying a lot of words, but really not saying anything, Tom.
Yeah, well, again, this is a president who really has a thirst for glory. Let's remember, this is a guy, putting his name on things. And I think, somebody may have put the bug in his ear to say, you will go down in history as the great liberator. You brought up Wag the Dog. I guess that, he, with his approval, where he's underwater on everything, he could think that this is going to solve a lot of his problems, except that his own base is going to hate this.
Now, whether the questioning is taking place at his home right now, we assume that to be the case. Now, remember, of course, he was formerly in that cottage. He then was moved to the Sandringham estate, which is still owned by the royal family, but the expectation was that either the king himself or some arrangement had been made for him to be moved to that different, smaller and much more secluded property than the one that we have seen in the past, one that he has shared on and off at times with his former wife, Sarah Ferguson. This is the location of what is taking place right now. I've got a feeling we're going to be dipping in and out of this a lot in the next little while. So if we're mid-conversation with anything we have planned this evening, we return to this and return to it instantly. But the images that are coming through is the police arriving, and then we understand upon the arrival inside the home, him to be arrested. That is the beginning of the process of, at the very least, questioning him or forcing him into a scenario of being questioned, all going back to his time as the trade envoy for the United Kingdom, when he would represent the United Kingdom government, again, regardless of politics, the royal family being above politics of the day, him being able to move in the upper echelons of multiple societies, perhaps armed with information that may well have been of use to others, And in the extreme case, and there is no evidence to this point, so I am simply speaking to the possibility of what could be the basis here, is whether the information that he used, he was able to in any way, shape or form, use to improve his personal or somebody else's circumstances. The breaking news tonight is that the former Prince Andrew is currently talking with police at his home on the fringes of Sandringham Estate. There will be much more that comes to air in the next hour. The second we know more, you will as well.
So that is a report there from the BBC. And the question is, how much does he know and how much is he going to tell? What is he going to say about others who are involved? Did he witness any folks from the United States, any high-profile people in the cabinet or otherwise who are mentioned in the files? That is the question. And this is a stunning development. It marks the first arrest to a member of the royal family in centuries, and it makes him the most high-profile figure so far to face criminal accusations in a scandal that continues to sweep in some of the world's richest and most powerful places.
When it comes to the event that happened yesterday, what's so hard for me to witness is people stating that the president is a racist, because I've seen him firsthand. He saved one of my best friend's lives, a black woman who has been with him for 18 years. So he has a black friend. He's a racist. No, he saved her life. No, he did.
Okay. He's a racist. Here's the problem, Savannah, and why we have a different take on it. Many of us have a different take on it, because when you target DEI programs with executive office, from your with executive orders, your first week in office, arguing that the policies undermine national unity. You know, when you shared racist posts about the Obamas, when you pursued the death penalty for the exonerated 5 after you knew they had been exonerated. These are the reasons that his behavior is so hard. And I don't know whether you know about this, but in the 70s, he was accused of discriminating against black tenants because he wouldn't rent to them. He didn't want them to build.
Was that an accusation?
No, that was a proven fact. They took him to court. The lawsuit was settled with the Justice Department.
She boils my blood. You want to boil my blood, Savannah Chrisley. She is the classic definition of someone who supposedly has meritocracy, being at the elevated position with those great minds. She feels comfortable up there, whereas the young man in the clip, yeah, he was cursing and he was speaking the way he speaks. I guarantee you his intelligence far outmatches hers. He was to the point. But then here's more informed.
But let me say this: it's great. I love that you said with those elevated minds. If you look at Whoopi, who is an EGOT, right? Whoopi is a living legend.
Yes.
Sonny Hostin is a former federal prosecutor, right? Then you have Joy Behar sitting there, who is also a living legend, has been on The View since its inception, and has a career beyond that as a comedian and an actress. And then I don't know who else is sitting there, but these are women. Sarah Haynes, who's is a journalist and has is accomplished in her own right. And then you have this reality show. Like, first of all, I don't know why she's sitting there, but then she thinks that she is to the level of these people where she can sit there and spout that bullshit. And I also I understand, and I don't know if it's true because I don't want. Apparently, there's also a woman on CNN who says the same thing, that Trump isn't racist, after the video, like some guest on CNN. And I'm like, I have no idea who it is, but it's like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? I don't understand. But anyway, I can't believe that she go on. I want to bring in now Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein. Mark, thank you for joining us.
That's my pleasure.
Can you hear us, Mark?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yes. Mark, thanks for joining. Yeah, look, I know that you want to, there are some things that you will talk about, some things that you won't talk about, but do you have any response to Prince Andrew's arrest today?
None whatsoever. No. I have nothing to add to that. I wasn't there. I never met him. So there's nothing I can add to this.
Yeah. But for the victims, I'm sure there has to be some sort of satisfaction in it, that they feel that at least someone is, are paying some consequences for it.
Well, from what I understand, he was arrested for crimes related to his position with the government, nothing to do with the thing with the girls. But that's not the topic I want to talk about.
Yes, you want to talk about what? About his
what I
death.
want to talk about is Jeffrey's death, which is actually a murder. I know a lot of people don't believe that, but with the release of the files, there's been more information coming out. For instance, the pathologist that actually did the autopsy, Dr. Kristen Roman, she was deposed afterwards, and in her deposition, she stated that she was told not to take DNA evidence, and she was prohibited from going to the crime scene, which is very unusual in this kind of a case. We also found that the FBI destroyed the hard drives, the information on hard drives in the prison, because they swapped them out when they shouldn't have, and they were warned that swapping out the hard drives would lose the information. There's a lot more information coming out, and also there's rumors out that there was a second autopsy. There wasn't a second autopsy. There was only one. The results of which, on the cause of death on the initial death certificate, it said pending further study, because Dr. Roman and Dr. Bodden, who was also at the autopsy, came out of the autopsy and they said they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. That doesn't appear anywhere. A few days later, Barbara Sampson, the chief pathologist, she calls it a suicide, and she never saw Jeff's body. So the question becomes, what is she basing her information on? And when the death certificate says pending further study, many pathologists have told me it usually takes weeks before you get an answer because they're studying something. Well, more recently, a group of pathologists have latched onto this and they contacted me. They're not doing this on my behalf, and I'm not paying for this or anything, so I don't want anybody to think this is being skewed to my favor. But I gave them all of the autopsy information, the photographs, all the records I had, and they've been investigating it. They've been doing the proper study. Okay, and they're coming out with a report, and it's going to be peer reviewed, and it will be released afterwards. But they'll basically be showing that this wasn't a suicide. But I'm not going to give any details now, because I'm waiting for this report to be released after it's peer reviewed. And then the issue becomes, look, factually, there's sort of three ways to die, right? You can commit suicide, you could die of natural causes, or you can have an unnatural death, either an accident or you're killed. So, if people want to believe that Jeffrey committed suicide, then all the information that we have pointing away from that could just be considered to be circumstantial evidence and ignored in their mind. The guards weren't doing their job, or the fire alarm system was made inoperable in the prison. That's one thing that many people don't know, that the fire alarm system was made inoperable, and that controls motion sensors and doors. But it was a suicide. But once the suicide gets knocked out of the box as a possibility, well, then you're left with natural causes. We know Jeff didn't die of natural causes. The other one is an unnatural death. And we know he wasn't hit by a bus. So, he was killed. And then a real investigation, an independent investigation, should be done into the murder. Now, the question becomes, who can do that? The DOJ has been covering up this whole case. It started when Bill Barr came out and said that after the death, that he personally watched the videotape of the camera outside of the tier, and he saw that nobody went in or out of the tier, and that convinced him it was a suicide. When I heard that initially, I realized this has to be a cover-up. Because number one, why is the Attorney General personally watching the videotape? That didn't make sense to me. Also, he led you to believe that in the videotape, he saw that you could see the door to the tier, because he said he saw nobody went in or out. Okay. And the other part is, there were 12 or so other prisoners on the tier that would not have to go and come from the tier in order to harm somebody else in the tier. The fact that he completely ignored that possibility, that another inmate or somebody put in there to be an inmate could have done harm, the fact that he ignored that, to me, is like that also, it doesn't make sense. So his conclusion, well, stick a pin in that. With the recent release last year of the videotape that he was referring to, it's been shown, number one, you cannot see the door to the tier. And it's been shown you can get to that door and leave from that door without being caught on that camera. There's also the instance of the orange blur going up the steps, whether it's an inmate in an orange outfit, or they're saying maybe guards were carrying a pile of sheets or something up the steps, but somebody was going towards that tier. So, if I can use the language, just what the fuck was Bill Barr talking about? That nobody went in or out when he couldn't see the door. And you can now see that somebody went up. And we know that that videotape was doctored and edited and pieced together. Of course, the people who study that kind of thing, they even know what program was used to manipulate that videotape.
This week, applause and boos, sliding polls, election anxiety, Epstein fallout, media shakeups. A lot moved, but there's more to come. Wait till you see the next drop.
Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Your support means the world to us. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a show. We're live every weekday at 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern Time with new clips dropping at 2 p. and 8 p. And if you want even more Don Lemon Show content, join the Lemon community. Members get exclusive posts, behind-the-scenes videos, and live chats just for you. So hit the join button or visit our channel page to sign up. Thanks again for all your love and your support, and I'll see you next time.